Hello, welcome to Vineyard KC West podcast. For more information, visit us at vineyardkcwest.com.
All right, so we are in the third week of a series that we're doing. The first 5 weeks is on time, and then the next 5 weeks is on money. And the whole focus is to get margin back from the margin monster, where it eats up our time, it eats up our money, because there's certain principles that God set in place for us to live by that will help us with that. So the first week we looked at overcoming crowded loneliness, and so we looked at how can we take back time for meaningful relationships. And then last week we looked at the Hebrew Day Planner, which was really looking at the life rhythm of Jesus and seeing how, as followers of him, we can actually follow that and end up having more meaningful days. That we don't have to just say at the end of every day, wow, what happened? I hope tomorrow is better. We can be intentional about it. And we looked at this, that in actuality, that the day, if we are intentional, we looked at days, the day can start, and there's a typo on here. Those are supposed to be switched, 6 p.m., 6 a.m. So 6 p.m. is supposed to be on the left there, but the day really starts at 6 p.m., right? So I get my work done, and everybody does all their stuff from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., but then in the evening, there's a gathering time. And your time may be 7 p.m. or 8 p.m. or whatever it is, but the point is an intentional time. And we talked about the Bedouin farmers that have done this. We may look and say, well, they don't have anything or whatever, but they live to well over 100 years because they follow this. I'm going to produce during the day. I'm going to rest at night, build relationships. And so that's what we looked at last week. And we handed out a Hebrew day planner and just kind of to help you start processing, how could I maybe take back my time? Because John Maxwell has a quote. It says, you don't change your life until you change something you do every day. And so it's very intentional about using that. So you may have some wins from this last week. I encourage you to keep at it and go for it. Today what we're going to do is we're going to look at rediscovering the Convivium, right? It sounds much more impressive than what it really is, but it's a Latin word. And the Convivium, we're going to learn how to use our biggest tool when it comes to relationships, right? Because it's one thing to talk about relationships, let's have them, but what are the tools we have at our disposal? So convivium means feast or like a banquet. And so, I know for me as a kid, I love Sunday brunch. Isn't that terrible? I never went to church growing up, so any time that we could go to Sunday brunch, we do that. And then now I have a job that kind of makes it not doable. But so Sunday brunch, just going to a restaurant and getting, they've got every food possible and stuff. And so a convivium is like a Sunday brunch. It's a feast. You're coming together with other people. It's a banquet. You share food together. But the greatest tool for the convivium, because the idea is really not the food, but the greatest tool is the table. And so we want to redeem the table, rediscover the table today. For me, the table had great significance for me growing up. We had this big round oak table, and it was in our family for a long time. And my dad and I moved quite a bit, and so I always wanted to carry the base to it because the table was very large and heavy, and it had these big fat screws, 4 screws that come up through the top of this, and these big, huge, thick legs. And I just loved to, we moved. I loved to grab that thing and just kind of, it was, you just hold that thing and carry it. It was comforting for me for whatever, just to carry the table. But, it was at that table that, I shared meals with my parents and my brother. It was at that table that grandparents would come and we would share a meal together, and my grandmother would come to our house. Her name was Virginia, and grew up part of her life in Nevada, Missouri here, and she would say, if I had my elbows on the table, Mabel, get your elbows off the table. And so I learned etiquette at that table. My brother and I, there was several times, so you won't think we had too much class when we were young, but there were several times where we would just look at each other and we would just start laughing. And if the timing was wrong, one of us had milk in our mouth. And so, the spitting up of the milk, just laughing at the table. So it was just a time. It was a center of my existence in a lot of ways. I do homework at the table. I remember my dad was teaching my brother science once at the table, and it was he was trying to teach him what what oxygen does with the body, and then it was this whole thing. What does the body do with oxygen? It uses it, and it was this thing where it was like my dad was a cowboy, rodeo, rode bulls and rope, and he was a Marine Corps officer, so you can imagine the scene. Is my brother wasn't getting this concept, what the body does with oxygen. But I remember all these years later. And, I arm wrestled my dad for the first and last times at that table. My brother, I'd arm wrestle my brother and do all sorts of things. And it was at that table, too, that I processed my parents' divorce, okay? Just hearing from that and thinking about that. It was at that table that I remember sitting there when I was, 16 years old and getting the phone call that one of my friends died in a car accident the night before. And so processing those things. But then the table was also redemptive for me because I remember the first time I was with somebody when they were reading the Bible. I was on a youth ski trip, and there was one of the leaders. Early in the morning, I got up, and he was sitting at the table reading the Bible. And I said, "Why are you reading the Bible?" Like, I didn't get it. I'd never been around it. I sat around a table with families. After my family, parents divorced, and I sat around with families, Christian families, that would just invite me into their homes and let me sit around their table with them, and I learned what family was again. And so the table's very redemptive in those things. And think about your life. Think about, the table, or at times, maybe the lack of table. Think about the relationships, the important relationships that you've built at the table, or the relationships that you could have built if the table was there. The table represents many things. Michelle and I's first date, it was so awkward. We worked together at the same church, and so we kind of like pseudo-dated for a while, but then like when we, decided, okay, we're going on a real date, it was so awkward. Just so awkward. And we sat there at this, this little restaurant right on the beach, and sitting there just kind of staring at each other. So I was coaching football at the time at a local high school, so I said, "Hey, you want to learn the base of our offense?" And she said, "Sure." And so I took the salt and pepper shakers and the sugars, and I said, "Okay, this is a one right slant, this is a one right slant pass, this is, and she knows it to this day. It's the only football play she knows, but so the table has significance, for us in all of our lives. What's interesting is that there's research on the power of the table. So children who experience life around the table are healthier physically, okay? So typically, you have less eating disorders, whether as far as staying away from food or too much food, if you have that consistency. Also, too, if you're at the table, you typically aren't, eating as much fast food and things. Our bodies take 20 minutes to actually digest food before it really lets us know you're full, right? And so there's something about sitting around a table that's intentional. Children who experience life around the table get better grades. You're actually twice as likely to get straight A's if you have time around the table as a family. And then also, too, children who experience life around the table are healthier emotionally. Why? Because, again, it's not the food. It's the connection. It's the connection with the others in the family. And, you could look at me on all of this scale. We did that all the way up until my parents' divorce, and then life got messy and crazy. And physically, had problems. Grades, I had straight A's up to that point, and then, I just decided I didn't care anymore. And then emotionally, all kinds of issues. I still do. Say, keep listening to me. I'm okay. Okay? So, and then so here's the other thing too. Columbia University did a study, and they said, what's the number one deterrent to your children smoking, drinking, doing drugs, engaging in premarital sex, and gang involvement, right? I think we would look at that and say we don't want our grandkids, our nephews, our kids, involved in any of those things. Why? Because they're unhealthy. They typically don't build up a life. They tear down a life. And it's this, is that dinner with family at least 5 nights a week. Okay? I will take liberty, and I will say that if you have, it doesn't have to be that narrow thing, that it's dinner with family 5 nights a week, because again, it's not the dinner or the food, but it's the intentional time, consistent, where they sit around the table. Like our life right now is absolutely insane. Michelle and I are basically Uber drivers, ATMs, and chefs for these 3 young men, you know. But one thing that we do right now is we grab that table time anytime we can. And then also, too, our most intentional time right now is Saturday mornings. We all sit around, we have breakfast together. Okay, the games are over, the different things, and that's intentional. And then we have other times where we play games and different things. But so dinner with fam at least 5 nights a week. Okay, check out this video. You gotta have sound.
Who would you choose?
Can't live without it.
Marilyn Monroe. Oh God, I wouldn't have a clue.
I know, straight up. All over.
Kim Kardashian.
No.
I'd like to have dinner with Justin Bieber.
What? He's not coming in my house.
I'd have Bob Hawke.
Dave Hughes.
Barry Humphrey.
Jimi Hendrix.
People who have made a difference in the world, maybe Nelson Mandela at the dinner table.
If you could have dinner with anyone in the world, who would you choose?
Probably our whole family, like our whole extended family. Mum and Dad. Mum and Dad. Does it have to be a celebrity? Could it be family?
We love it. We talk about how school is. We ask Mum and Dad how their day was.
Family. Yeah, Mum and Dad.
Family. Who would you always like to have dinner with? They just want to be with us while they're eating food, which is pretty cool.
They see us above everything. I'm brilliant.
Yeah,
Yeah.
bit of a message in it for me.
Yeah.
Probably home for dinner.
So this isn't a new idea. It's absolutely not a new idea. And you look at this is obviously aimed at like people with younger kids. But here's the concept, is that you can do this with anybody that's important to you. Whoever your tribe is, whoever your people are, you do that with. And that's what brings you the health in life. It doesn't even have to be biological family, but it's people that are important to you. You gather with them regularly. It has all of those benefits for you. You may not be looking for good grades, better grades. Maybe you're out of school, obviously. But I guarantee you, I haven't seen a study, but I would guess that you do better at work. You have better relationships, better physical, emotional health if you just do this with people. And so it's not a new idea. In the Old Testament, the Hebrews and Jews still celebrate this today as they start the Sabbath, is you have the Shabbat meal. And so they would start the Sabbath at 6 p.m. on Friday nights. Everyone comes together, and they start their time of rest with a meal. And it's just intentional. And it builds this life, this people. And so we also see it in the life of Jesus. So we see that the table was central in his life. The heart and call and invitation of Jesus is at the table. Listen to what's written at the beginning of the book of Revelation. It says, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock." So this is Jesus speaking. "If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in to him and will dine with him, and he with me." Obviously, it's people, so with her, she as well. But look how intimate this is. You have the picture of standing at the door and knocking, right? If you've ever done sales, you know, I'm at the door, I'm knocking. Will somebody answer? Do they want to see me? Can I come in? But then it says, if anyone hears my voice. And so Jesus is speaking to the state of people always, right? We've got so much noise in our lives. We've got so many things going on. We've got so many demands upon us. If anyone hears my voice and then opens the door. It's also implied that people can open the door to him. He doesn't bust down the door, but that there's actually something that we're involved in, that we open the door to be with him. And then he says that this is what he will do. I read something interesting this week that when it comes to like words in the Old Testament, when it translates promises, the word we say promise is like, I promise you, right? Here's my promise, okay? For God, it's not, the word isn't promise. It's actually just that he spoke. So if God speaks it, it is. Isn't that crazy? So when Jesus speaks it, it's like, it's a promise because we need that. We need that assurance. That's how we look at it. But what Jesus is saying is just like, look, if I said it, it is. I will come into him or her and will dine with them at the table, and he or she with me. So Jesus' very heart, like if you were to sum up God's heart for people, for you and I, we would be able to sum it up in this. Like this is perfect. It's just somebody says, well, tell me about Jesus, or tell me what he's like, or what he wants to do with my life. It's this, is he wants to be at the table with us. He wants to do that. And so we see 9 table experiences in Jesus' life. We see in Luke, in the book of Luke, we see these 9. There was a Passover meal, okay? So in the Passover meal, right, so that you had the people of Israel, they were enslaved for 400 years. You can read in the book of Exodus, and you can see the building up of it in Genesis. And it was prophesied that they would be enslaved for 400 years in this land. But at the end of this time, they were crying out to God. And an unlikely leader came and led them, Moses. He failed miserably, went off into the desert for 40 years, and then came back, and now he's their leader. But during this time, they're pleading out, like, God, would you let these people go? God, would you, Pharaoh, would you let these people go? And no, and his heart's hard. And so there's these plagues that come and these different things. And then finally there's the Passover meal, right? Where the angel of death would pass over the homes that had the blood of the lamb on their doorpost. God told them specifically that if you take a lamb, pure spotless lamb, and put the blood on the doorpost, then the angel will pass over and no one in your home or household will die. And then they were set free, and then they went off. And it's the whole story of how they were set free. But it's all pointing towards what the ultimate Passover lamb, which is Jesus. Right? That the blood of the lamb would cover me. That death would have no hold over me. That I'd be set free. That I would be set free from slavery. So now you have the true Passover lamb that the whole Passover was pointing to, all the meaning and everything within it. You have the Passover lamb sitting there at the table, taking this with his disciples at the table. And then also you had Matthew's party, one of my favorite stories in Scripture. Matthew was a tax collector. And he was sitting at his tax collector booth one day, and in Matthew it says that Jesus saw him. It says that Jesus saw Matthew, or Levi, sitting at the tax collector's booth. And I imagine that if Jesus is before you bodily, physically, and he saw you, it's like you're just undone. Just God incarnate himself just looking at you. You're just undone. You just feel just totally naked out there. There's just an intimacy that he knows you. And so he saw him, and so he speaks to him. He just walks by and he goes, follow me. Right? You ever try that, people? But that's what Jesus did. Follow me. There was some buildup there. There was something that Jesus knew was going on with him. God was working his life. And so it says that Matthew got up from the tax collector booth, and tax collectors were the worst of the worst. Okay? They were considered worse than sinners. Because what they did is they ripped off the Jewish people, and they played games with the Romans, and so they were kind of this in-between, and they were thieves, basically. Because the Romans would say, hey, here's the tax that you need to pay us, and whatever you do beyond that is up to you. So they would charge whatever rate that they want to be able to take whatever they want. And you couldn't even pass. There'd be like toll booths and different things. But it says that Matthew got up and went with Jesus, and then there was a party at Matthew's house with a table. And it says that many tax collectors and sinners were there. So whatever you could fill into that definition of sinner, into that blank, they were there. And then the Pharisees saw it, the religious, who were supposedly knew God, and they said, why does your master, to his disciples, hang out with tax collectors and sinners? And Jesus heard it, and he says, It's not the healthy that need a doctor, it's the sick, right? But the problem is that they didn't get it. No, it's like, who goes to the doctor? The one that knows they need help. And he was saying to them, you need help too. And then two, Jesus was anointed by a sinful woman where she broke this expensive perfume and, like a year's wages and anointed him. And then there was dinner with 5,000, right? I mean, if you've ever prepared for a big dinner, Jesus takes loaves and fishes, this little kid's lunch. His mom packs him a lunch, and Jesus takes his lunch and multiplies it for 5,000. And the table at this point is just this huge field, I'm sure. Just grass, and they're all just hanging out there. And then dinner with Mary and Martha. And then dinner with Pharisees, right? The Pharisees were Jesus' enemies, per se. But do we miss that? That they're always going after Jesus. They're telling that they want to kill Jesus. They want to arrest Jesus. They want to get rid of Jesus. But Jesus is spending time with them. He really lived, love your enemies. Don't push against your enemies or harm your enemies, but love your enemies. He really lived it. Dinner with Pharisees twice, we see. And then we see the Last Supper, right, where they took the Passover meal right before his death. We see that. And then also, too, after his resurrection, he has a meal with his disciples. So the table was always a part of Jesus' life and in what he did. The table was also central to the early church. So when we get together like this, right, Sunday morning, why do we do Sunday morning? Well, Sunday morning because Jesus rose in the morning. That's what we do. But the early church, it was very much about gathering around for probably dinner or supper. And I'm sure they met in the morning too, but we just see that they gather around for a meal. The church would meet for a meal. So it says that in Acts chapter 2, verse 42, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. I realized in 2012 that much of my discipleship as a pastor took place at the table. I met a man, and I talked about him some, and hopefully you guys won't get tired of it, but just an important person in my life, but a man named Bear, when I was 15 years old, came to my high school, said, hey, to our football team, you guys want to start Fellowship of Christian Athletes at the school? And, yeah, let's do it. And so we did, and he helped, and then fast forward, I saw him later, and then I came on staff at a church where he was a pastor at, but I realized that there was a 3-year period where I came on, and then he spent time just really intense discipling me as a pastor in life and as a man and all those things. And I realized it all happened, most of it, at different restaurants. Because I was living in San Luis Obispo, California, and he had passed away in 2012. And so when I went back for his funeral, and every time I went back to San Diego, and still every time I go back, I'll drive by these restaurants. I'm like, we used to meet there. We used to meet there, we used to meet there and spend time there. And it was just all over at the table, at the meal. And just sharing life together, sharing, stories. There was brokenness at the table. And as the relationship went on after that 3-year period, there was more this way too, where he would share back with me and I would encourage him and help him. But it was just at the table. And, so I, your life is probably similar where you do that. So here's how we do this, okay? Because we have to have a how. This is how we do this in our lives. And whatever situation you're looking at, you may be a business owner and you're like, you know what? I want my employees and who I have, I want them to have this closeness. I realize the value of this and I want them to have this time. It could be your family, your immediate family. It could be your extended family. But whatever situation you're thinking of while we're talking about this, that's where you should apply it. And you can apply these principles to any of that, right? Really what the table is this, to me, it's this idea of recreation, right? You know the word recreation, right? When you recreate, you're recreating. You're recreating relationships. You're recreating life. You're encouraging. You're pouring in. So here's a few steps to help you with it. First of all, if you're going to set the table and use the table as a tool in your life, it's got to be intentional and consistent, okay? There may be different people that you meet with or have meals with or coffee with or that sort of thing here and there, but it's for a certain purpose. But then you have a smaller group that you're going to have this intentional and consistent time with it. When you do this, you actually get into the rule of compounding, right? Compounding or compounding interest is what some people call the eighth wonder of the world, is about small deposits consistently over a period of time that just grow exponentially. It works with money. It works with relationships. It works with time. I've applied it. My family, we definitely have our faults and all sorts of things. But I've applied this when we've been planting churches or when I've been bivocational as a pastor. We've applied this intentional and consistent idea so that we keep strong relationships throughout everything, even though we are crazy busy. Like no one would trade for your schedule. But we've been able to move forward in relationships because we just make small deposits. So intentional and consistent. When it comes to meals, here's the idea there. One table, okay? So like we have a table that it has, you can, different sections you can add to it. And when we first got it, the boys were smaller and now they're bigger. But we just decided we just leave it open because we end up with people there at different times. So we just have this table. So we just always keep it one table. And so if you have adults and kids and everybody, get them all at one table, at least around one area. The next thing is give thanks or say grace, okay? My wife and I, when the boys were younger, at first, we would always give thanks, right? Thanks, Lord, for this food. Thanks for, your provision for us, these things. And much more now, it's like, if you were to be a fly on the wall in a pastor's home, it's like they almost have been in a physical fight to who would pray, at the meal. And so I am not sure that's good, but, it's just like they get it. And so they want to pray, they want to give thanks, they want to do that. So you model it, and then your kids can get it as well. Family style with the food. So if you have food on the table, there's this amazing thing. It's like skin on skin, where it's like, hey, John, can you pass the potatoes? Susie, can you pass the broccoli? Can you pass the steak or whatever? That interaction, we can gloss over it these days. But when you ask, right, there may be conversation. You have to, put your voice up. You have to, how am I going to ask? Give me, or, so you get to practice good manners as you do it. You get to, all sorts of things happen during this time if you do it this way. The next thing is one conversation, right? So the key point there is the phones are out of the picture. The TV's off. So there's one conversation. And typically what we will do with this is when we get time is how was your day? How was your week? And you can share hard things, you can share good things, but you just share. And as you practice this, there's something that happens where you can really build a life off of this. And then also, too, cleaning up, right? We fail at this sometimes. It's like we turn around and they're gone, okay? But really, that cleaning up and doing dishes together and picking up, again, it's flesh on flesh. It's doing something together where we put together and we clean up together and we do this together. And then the last thing is, and this is a kid, I hated this. Because my grandparents and my parents were really into all of us being at the table. And it was just kind of like, can I go? Can I go? Can I go? Let me go. But now I'm just like, oh, no, can we just sit for one more minute? Can we just linger here for just one more second? Can we just enjoy this time? Can we just let the food settle and share more, talk more? Jesus did this. It says that Matthew 26:20 says, now when evening came, Jesus was reclining at the table with the 12 disciples. So they would sit at tables with like a U shape, and when they would eat, they would kind of be there, but there would be pillows, and you typically would like lean in to the person next to you, right? John did that at one of the meals, just kind of leaning in to the person next to you. And so that lingering time is important. The next thing is, because here's the thing. You don't have to say, well, it's got to be dinner. No, the whole idea is the table so that you're there. So you can do it with snacks. My wife is a master at this. She's done it since the boys were little. She gathers them around, and they'll have a snack together. She even does it now with these big middle school and high schoolers, and they just sit there and they have a snack and they just talk. There was even a time where, one of them, had, recently, don't tell them I told you this, but it was just kind of like it wasn't really happening. So she's like, hey, let's have floor time. And so all of a sudden it would turn into wrestling amongst the boys and stuff. And they just kind of, let's sit on the floor. And so the floor is a table too. You can play cards and games around a table. We did this last night. Because I was studying for this, I'm like, I'm not really good at this right now. And so I texted her like, hey, do you think we could pull off, playing a game or something tonight? And she's like, I just tried. Maybe if we wait an hour, it will work. And so I just want you to know, full disclosure, you have to fight for this. It's not something that necessarily comes easy, but it worked. And we actually had a wonderful time. There was laughing and fun, and I almost won. I haven't won a card game or a game in 20 years because Michelle always beats me, and then the boys do it too. And then the next thing is coffee and dessert, right? Just sit around, enjoy coffee, share something together. Just do that. You can build a life upon that. And then reading too, right? About just reading a book. I have a book. The boys make fun of me because I've been reading it to them for like 3 years. And they're like, man, we've been reading this for so long. And I tell them, though, I said, hey, nobody did this with me. And so it's this book about like masculinity, about being a man, about being a manly man. And it's got these different characteristics of what a man means. And so every once in a while, I'll just pull them, hey, let's read this. And so it talks about suffering. And it talks about integrity. It talks about these. So I'll just read it to them, and it gives great quotes from different people and stuff. And so we read, and it's a place. And sometimes they are better listeners than others, whatever. But I just ask them, what'd you hear? I heard this. What does that mean for you? I heard this. So it's the table. How do you take this home? How do you apply it to your life? Well, one, start by scheduling the convivium or table at least one time this week, right? So apply it right away. If you don't have this currently, if it's kind of loose, just schedule a time this week with the people that are important to you. If it's at your work, schedule it with your employees. Have a lunchtime or something like that. But just set it up, schedule it, try it, and go for it. And it's really like my doctor told me years ago. I was talking to him. He said, Cody, I think this is like your ideal weight. Like, I agree, because it was higher than I was really hoping for, right? And I said, so how fast do you think I can do it, whatever? And he said, Cody, just get the first one. Just get the first one. Just do the first pound, okay? Just do the first pound, and you'll get there. And so that's what you do with this too. Just get the first time at the table scheduled. So here's what I want you to know, is the table speaks of acceptance, belonging, and oneness. It just does. If you think about it, when you sit down with somebody, you're identified with that person. You're sharing something with that somebody. It speaks of intimacy. And remember what Jesus said, I read in the beginning? This is at the beginning of the book of Revelation. And the book of Revelation is the revelation of who? It's the revelation of Jesus Christ. And so people get involved with all the prophecy and all this stuff here, which is cool, right? But that's not the point. The point is to reveal who Jesus Christ is. And so at the beginning of the book, we have, behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into him and will dine with him and he with me. So there's the promise of oneness, of intimacy, of belonging, of acceptance, if you open the door to Jesus. But then at the end of the book, it's said about this, about his table. Then he said to me, right, blessed are those who are called to the marriage supper of the Lamb. It's intentional. That at the beginning of the book, you have this great invitation of just open up and come in. And then near the end, they write about this great marriage supper that's going to happen. It's an image that's important to us, guys, because we can practice this. As followers of Jesus, this is where it's all heading. It's the greatest wedding marriage supper ever. Like, think of the best party you've ever been to. It's not going to do anything in compared to this. Because there's no more crying, there's no more fear, there's no more sin, there's nothing, there's no more shame. It's all washed away. And we're just there, feasting with Jesus. That's where it's all headed. That's the heart of God. And so the way that we grab the breadcrumbs of knowing God, one of the ways is this tool of the table. One study actually showed that being at the table with your family has more effect upon a person's, how they live their life with values and integrity, as it has more effect than going to church, than church attendance. Because there's that intimacy there. There's that life there. It builds something. And when we do it, and we invite Jesus into it, it's all the more. So let's stand and let's pray together.
Thanks for listening this week. If you're looking for ways to serve, give, or get connected, please visit vineyardkcwest.com.